I don't know why I stopped that night. The old police station wasn't on my way home. It wasn't even in a town I belonged to. It just appeared out of the tree line like it had been waiting for me all along. The place had been closed for years. I'd heard stories about it. Everyone in the county had. Officers quitting all at once. A whole staff gone overnight. No explanation. The building was left to rot, sitting on the edge of a dirt road nobody cared to travel anymore. I pulled over anyway. I told myself I was only curious, that I just wanted to peek inside. But even before I killed the engine, I knew I was lying to myself. I wanted something more than curiosity. I wanted the silence. I wanted to be inside a place the world had abandoned. The air was damp when I stepped out. The kind of damp that sticks to your throat. The parking lot was cracked and choked with weeds, but the painted white lines were still there, faint under the dirt. A few rotted wooden barricades leaned against the chain-link fence, like someone once tried to seal it off but gave up halfway. The front doors were glass, smeared with dust and ash-gray fingerprints that hadn't been cleaned in years. One of the doors hung crooked in its frame. The lock had been broken by someone braver than me a long time ago. I pushed it open. The sound it made was louder than it should have been. Like the whole building groaned at my arrival. Inside smelled like mildew and cold rust. The air was stale, but not as heavy as I thought it would be. My flashlight beam cut across the lobby, catching pieces of old posters and a corkboard littered with missing pet flyers. I paused on one. A dog with floppy ears, lost in 2008. That's when it hit me how long this place had been frozen. I walked slowly, my boots sticking against a film of grime on the floor. The front desk sat to the right, its surface layered with dust. Pens were scattered across it, one still uncapped. Behind the counter was a window of smudged plexiglass, meant to separate officers from whoever walked in. The chair behind the desk was still there, pulled out slightly as if the last person who sat in it just stood up and never came back. That's when I saw the keys. They hung neatly on the wall inside the office. A long board of hooks, each labeled with white tape. My light caught the brass teeth glinting faintly in the dust. Row after row of keys, polished dull with age but untouched. Patrol car keys, storage keys, locker keys, and jail cell keys. I don't know why, but that made me stop breathing for a second. I had expected emptiness. Broken glass, graffiti, the things you find in abandoned places. But not this. Not order. The keys looked like they were still waiting to be used. I stared for a long time, just letting the silence press against me. My mind began to wander. Why hadn't anyone taken them? Scrappers stole copper pipes and ceiling tiles, but these keys, they'd been left untouched, and the strangest thought wormed its way into my head. Maybe they were never abandoned. Maybe the officers still needed them wherever they went. I shook it off. The office door creaked when I nudged it open. The hinges were stiff, complaining at being moved. The desk inside was littered with old paperwork, coffee-stained, curling at the corners. An old monitor sat dark on the surface, its screen cracked. But the keys, I stepped closer. Each hook bore a label, faded but legible. Some had names scratched on them. Unit 4, Locker 7, Cell A2. I reached out without thinking. My fingers brushed one of the brass tags. It was cold, colder than it should have been in that room. I jerked my hand back and flexed my fingers, convincing myself it was nothing, just metal, just the chill of a place left unheated for too long. But I couldn't shake the feeling that touching them had woken something. Behind me, the building popped and groaned with the sound of settling wood and rusted pipes. Normal sounds, but it made my skin crawl anyway. I took out my phone thinking I'd snap a picture, but the screen stayed black. Dead. I swore I had half a charge when I pulled in. The silence grew heavier. I found myself whispering just to break it. Still on the hook. All of them still on the hook. My voice didn't sound like my own. It sounded small, distant. My flashlight caught a shadow moving along the hallway behind the office glass. I froze. The beam shook in my hand. The shadow stretched across the wall, tall and thin, then bent around the corner like someone turning. I should have run, but my feet wouldn't listen. Instead, I stepped toward the hallway. The floor tiles cracked under my weight. My light swept across old bulletin boards, broken filing cabinets, and a calendar still pinned to the wall. The month was March. The year, 2009. 13 years ago, the hallway branched left toward the holding cells. I hesitated. My chest felt tight, like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to continue. And then my light caught something, another hook board on the wall. This one empty, except for a single key dangling at the end. A cell key. The tag read, "Holding B." The chain swayed lightly, as if someone had just taken the others off. I whispered again without meaning to. "Why is this one still here?" No answer came, but I didn't expect one. The further I walked, the more I noticed it. The building wasn't covered in graffiti. No beer cans, no trash piles, none of the usual rot left behind by squatters. It was clean. Too clean. It looked less abandoned and more paused. Like the moment the officers left, the whole station froze in time. Chairs stayed pulled out. Coffee mugs half finished. Keys still waiting. The thought made my stomach turn. At the end of the hall, the cell block door waited. A heavy metal frame, its paint blistered, but the lock looked untouched. I reached for the handle, it turned easily. Too easily. The door creaked open into darkness. My flashlight beam cut across rows of barred cells. Empty bunks, empty benches. The air was damp and smelled faintly of bleach, like someone had tried to scrub away something years ago but never finished. And then I saw them, more hooks on the wall inside. Each cell had a key hanging beside it, neat and orderly. All except one, cell B, that key was missing. I stepped back without meaning to. My shoulder hit the frame of the doorway. My heart was pounding so loud it drowned out the silence. The missing key, the one left on the wall. Holding B, it wasn't gone. It was here. Waiting for me, I stared down the row of cells. My flashlight shook across the bars, each one empty. 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 Until the last one, where the light seemed to sink into the dark and not come back. I didn't go further. I couldn't. Instead, I backed out of the cell block, my hand never leaving the beam of light fixed on that last cell. The hallway swallowed me again, the air colder now. I felt the weight of all those untouched keys pressing behind me, their silence heavier than footsteps. When I finally stumbled back into the lobby, the glass door was still cracked open, waiting for me to leave. I should have gone straight to my car, driven away, never looked back. But before I did, I turned one last time. Through the office glass, the keys still hung on the wall, each one exactly in its place. But I swear, they were swinging gently, like someone had brushed past them just seconds before. And the chain for holding B was gone. I didn't sleep the night after I first went inside. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the rows of keys hanging so neatly like someone had just placed them there. And I kept hearing that faint sound of metal chains swaying. Even in my dreams, I heard it. I told myself I wouldn't go back, that it was just a stupid impulse. But the next evening, when the sky turned the color of ash, I found myself back on that same dirt road. My car knew the way, even if I didn't want to admit it. The building looked different this time. Not in any physical way. It was still the same cracked lot, the same sagging doors, but it felt less empty. Almost like it expected me. I stepped inside again, flashlight in hand. The smell was sharper now. Mold mixed with something else, like old paper that had been soaked and dried over and over. I went straight past the lobby, straight past the hooks of keys, even though I felt their cold presence on the back of my neck. I told myself I was here for one reason only: the desk. When I'd been in the office before, I noticed something under the clutter of paperwork. A thick book bound in faded black leather. I hadn't dared touch it then, but now it felt like the reason I'd come back. I brushed off layers of dust and pulled it toward me. The word logbook was stamped across the cover in blocky white letters. My hands hesitated on the cover. I could still turn around. I could leave it untouched. But I didn't. I opened it. The first pages were what you'd expect: shift notes, arrest records, vehicle reports. Each entry was written by hand, initials scribbled at the end. The handwriting was rough, rushed, like cops always in a hurry. But as I flipped through, the dates pulled at me. March 2009. March 11th, March 12th, March 13th, normal, routine. And then, March 28th. The station was supposed to have closed on March 14th. That was the date in every official article, the date burned into people's memories. But here, staring back at me in faded ink, were entries written weeks later. The handwriting was tighter now. Desperate. One note read, "Noise in the cells again. Checked B block empty. Still hearing it." Another, "Keys missing. Found them back on the hook in the morning." And another, "Prisoner count does not add up. Ledger says 6. Cells hold 5. No explanation." My chest tightened as I read. My eyes scanned the words, but my brain refused to process them fully. The officers had stayed. They hadn't left when they were supposed to. They kept writing, they kept working. But no one ever told the public. I turned another page. The ink here was darker, pressed hard into the paper. Screams from Holding B again last night. Officer Jenkins swore he saw movement. No prisoner recorded. I don't want to check anymore. Radio picking up chatter. Not from dispatch. Not from anywhere we can trace. Same voices repeating. Same words. The handwriting was slipping, less neat, more frantic. Then one line stopped me cold. "If anyone finds this, don't let them out." No name, no initials. Just that one line across an entire page. I froze with my finger resting on the words, afraid to even flip the page. My ears strained for any sound in the station, any hint that I wasn't alone. But the silence pressed heavier, like the whole building was listening. I forced myself to keep going. The later entries were shorter, scribbles, numbers, random times. A countdown scratched in ink across 2 whole pages, and then at the very end, a final message. Shift never ended. We're still here. The ink trailed off in a smear, as if the pen had been dragged away mid-sentence. I sat there staring at those words until my vision blurred. My hands were trembling against the cover. Shift never ended. I don't know why, but my eyes drifted toward the keyboard again. Through the glass, I could see them, still in their neat rows. But I couldn't shake the thought that maybe they weren't keys at all. Maybe they were reminders, anchors, proof of something still locked away. I tried to shut the logbook, but it resisted, like the pages didn't want to close. I pressed harder and the slam echoed in the office, bouncing down the hallway. That's when I heard it. A sound I'll never forget. Paper turning. Not here, not in the office, but further down the hall. Like another book being flipped open. Like someone was copying my movements. I froze, every muscle locked. My flashlight beam trembled across the desk. The sound came again. Pages shifting, slow, careful. I wanted to believe it was rats, or the wind, anything. But it sounded deliberate. "Someone reading." My throat went dry. I whispered without meaning to. "Hello?" The silence snapped back. The turning stopped. I listened until my ears rang with the effort, but there was nothing. No reply. Just the building creaking around me like an old lung breathing shallow. I slid the logbook back where I found it. My fingers felt dirty, like the ink had bled into my skin. When I stepped out into the hall, my light caught something new, a set of muddy prints on the tile. Boot marks, leading from the cells toward the office. They weren't there when I came in. I was sure of it. The prints stopped just outside the office door. I looked down at my own boots, at the clean floor where I'd walked. These weren't mine. The soles were wider, the tread deeper. Someone else had been here. Or never left. My hands shook as I followed the trail backward, step by step. The prints faded into the darkness of the cell block door. I should have turned back. Should have left the station behind and never thought of it again. But something in me, the same thing that brought me here, kept me standing there, staring into the dark. That last line in the logbook played over and over in my head. Shift never ended. "We're still here, still here." The silence felt thicker now. My light trembled down the hall, brushing over the peeling paint, the cork boards, the frozen calendar. And then it landed on the keyboard again. One of the keys was missing. Not the Holding B key. I already knew that one was gone. No, this time it was different. Locker 12. The hook was bare. The tag hanging loose. I don't remember leaving the station. I only remember the air outside hitting me like water, and the sudden relief of the car door slamming shut. But as I drove away down the dirt road, my headlights caught something in the glass lobby, the shape of someone sitting behind the desk, their head bowed over the logbook. I should have been done with that place. 2 visits were enough to tell me something was wrong, enough to warn me that whatever lived in those walls wasn't meant for me. But when night fell again, my mind kept circling back to it. The logbook, the missing keys, the boot prints that weren't mine. It all looped in my head like a song I couldn't shut off. I didn't want to admit it, but I knew deep down I was going back. This time, I didn't wait until morning. I left after midnight. The roads were empty, my headlights cutting tunnels of pale light through the fog. Every mile I drove, the air grew heavier, like I was descending into something. When I pulled up to the station, I just sat in my car for a long time, staring at the crooked front doors. The glass reflected my headlights, but nothing stared back. I kept waiting for that shadow at the desk to move again, to confirm what I thought I'd seen the night before. But the reflection stayed still. Finally, I forced myself out. The gravel crunched under my boots. The sound carried too far in the silence, like the world was amplifying it just to remind me I didn't belong here. Inside, the air was colder than before. My breath puffed white in the beam of my flashlight. The lobby looked exactly the same. Dust, missing pet flyers, the rows of untouched keys. But I didn't stop at the office this time. I went straight for the cells. The heavy metal door groaned as I pulled it open. The sound rang through the corridor, echoing into the darkness. I felt it sink into the walls, swallowed whole, my light stretched across rows of bars. Each cell gaped open, shadows clinging to the corners like wet stains. I forced myself forward, my boots clicking against the tile. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the building groaning again, a low rasp buried under layers of silence. But then it shaped into something more. Words, not loud, not clear, just a faint whisper carried on the air. I stopped cold, straining to hear. My heart slammed against my ribs, each beat echoing louder than the sound itself. The whisper came again. From deep within the row of cells, I turned my flashlight toward the sound. The beam shook, trembling across the bars. Every cell was empty. Empty bunks, empty floors, nothing but dust. But the whisper didn't stop. It grew sharper, almost like a hiss. Not one voice, several, layered on top of each other. Too low to make out words, but too deliberate to ignore. I told myself it had to be wind, the way air pushed through cracks and vents. But then I realized the windows in here were sealed shut. There was no wind. I stepped closer. My light fell on cell A1. Empty. Cell A2. Empty. The whispers grew clearer, like they were following my movements, waiting for me to pass. My ears strained to catch the rhythm, but every time I thought I recognized a word, it slipped away. By the time I reached the last cell in the row, the sound was so close it felt like it was brushing against my skin. I raised my flashlight, and for half a second I swore I saw movement. A shape pressed against the bars, thin, hunched, with a face too pale to belong in the dark. I jerked back so hard I hit the opposite wall. The light swung wild, scattering shadows, and when I fixed it again, the cell was empty. Nothing but rusted bars and dust. The whispers died at once, like a breath sucked back into lungs. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. It pressed against me, so heavy I thought my chest would cave in. My hand shook so bad I almost dropped the light. I told myself I imagined it, that the shape, the face, the sound, all of it was just my brain clawing for patterns in the dark. But when I turned to leave, the whispers started again. This time, they weren't behind me. They were in front of me. Down the second row of cells, I froze. Every instinct screamed to run. But something stronger, curiosity, obsession, I don't know, pulled me forward. The sound grew sharper as I walked. It wasn't random anymore. It had rhythm, cadence, almost like names. I paused, holding my breath, and for a moment I heard it clear as day. A name, my name. I staggered back, the word echoing in my head long after the whisper itself died. My legs wanted to bolt, but I couldn't move. My mind kept clawing at the sound, replaying it over and over. It wasn't just one voice. It was many, all of them saying my name in unison. I forced myself to step closer to the nearest cell, raising my light. The beam swept across the bars, the bunk, the cracked concrete floor, empty. But then, from the dark corner, the whisper crawled out again. My name, stretched thin and broken like a voice dragged across glass. My stomach dropped. I couldn't breathe. My hand clenched the flashlight so tight my knuckles popped. I stumbled back, my shoulder scraping the wall. My name echoed again, this time from the opposite cell. Then another. And another. It was everywhere now, all around me. My name rising and falling in 100 broken voices. I turned and ran. My boots hammered the tile, the sound chasing me as the whispers grew louder, sharper, almost shrieking now. I burst out of the cell block, slamming the heavy door behind me. The metal shook against its frame, but it didn't silence them. The whispers seeped through, muffled but endless. I backed into the hallway, gasping, my chest tight. My flashlight beam cut across the keyboard again. My eyes locked on the empty hooks. More were missing now. Not just holding B, not just locker 12. 5 hooks, bare. The tag still hung there, swaying gently like the keys had just been taken. I whispered without meaning to. Who took them? No answer came. Just the faint sound of metal rattling inside the cell block, like keys sliding into locks. I stumbled back further. My boot caught on the cracked tile and I nearly fell. My light jerked across the hallway, landing on the calendar still frozen on March 2009. The paper fluttered faintly, though no air moved. I didn't go back into the office. I didn't touch the logbook. I didn't dare look toward the desk again. I ran. The lobby groaned as I tore through it. My light bouncing across the missing pet flyers, the dusty chairs, the crooked glass door. When I hit the night air outside, it felt like surfacing from underwater. I staggered toward my car, gasping, the cold air burning my lungs. I didn't look back until I was inside. Doors locked, engine screaming. Through the cracked lobby doors, I could see the faint glow of my flashlight still lying on the floor where I dropped it. And behind it, in the cell block darkness, 100 pale faces pressed against the bars, all of them whispering. I didn't tell anyone what I saw that night. How could I? What would I even say? That an abandoned jail whispered my name? That faces pressed against bars where no one lived anymore? Nobody would believe me. They'd think I was losing my mind. But silence is its own kind of sickness. It eats at you. The longer I kept it inside, the heavier it grew. I tried to go about my life. I tried to work, to sleep, to eat. But every quiet moment I heard them again, the whispers. It wasn't just noise anymore. It wasn't just my imagination. The voices had started to shape themselves in my head. They had rhythm. They had names. Not just mine, other names too. Dozens of them. Strange ones. Common ones. Some I'd never heard before. Some that stuck in my throat like half-remembered dreams. But mine. Mine was always louder. It followed me everywhere. In the shower, at work, driving home at night. Always there, curling at the edge of my hearing. Sometimes I caught myself whispering back, without even meaning to. Just repeating it like I was part of their chorus. I tried to fight it, tried to ignore it. But one night I woke up to the sound of keys rattling, inside my house. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, listening so hard it made my ears ache. The sound came from my hallway, slow. Metal brushing against metal, like someone was testing keys against a door that wasn't theirs. I wanted to believe it was a dream. But when I turned my head toward the dark, I swear I saw a sliver of movement, like a shadow slipping out of sight. The next morning, I knew I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't let it follow me forever. I had to go back, not because I wanted to, but because I felt like I'd already been marked. The station was waiting for me. The lot looked the same, cracked and forgotten, weeds growing higher with every visit. I parked at the edge and sat there with the engine running, telling myself over and over this was the last time. One more look, one more step inside, and then I'd close the door on this forever. The air inside was heavier, as if the walls themselves remembered me. My flashlight beam shook across the lobby. The corkboard, the missing pet flyers, the desk, all of it felt staged. like props left for me alone. The logbook was still there. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. I went straight for the cells. The metal door groaned open, spilling me into the dark corridor again. My light swept across the rows of bars, and the whispers came instantly. Not faint this time. Not drifting, clear, names tumbling over each other in broken voices. Men, women, young, old. All of them spilling into the air like a chant. I froze, trying to make sense of it. The names weren't random. They were people. Some I recognized, last names from the county, names I'd seen in old newspapers. Others I didn't. But they all blended together in a river of sound that pulled me deeper. And then, beneath them all, I heard mine. My name, stretched and repeated until it filled every crack of the cell block. Louder than the rest, sharper. The beam of my light shook so bad I could barely keep it straight. My knees felt weak, but I forced myself forward. My boots dragged against the tile, carrying me past one empty cell after another. Each time I passed a barred door, the voices swelled like they were waiting for me to stop. When I reached holding B, I knew. The whispers fell silent all at once, leaving only my name echoing through the corridor. Just one voice now, thin, fragile, but so close it could have been inside my own head. I raised the light toward the bars. The cell was empty. Dust layered the floor. The bunk was bare. Nothing but concrete and rust, but I felt it. The presence. I pressed against the bars without meaning to, my fingers clutching the cold metal. "Who's in there?" I whispered, my voice cracking. The reply came back instantly, my own voice, repeating the question. Word for word! I staggered back, slamming into the opposite wall. My flashlight clattered against the floor, its beam rolling across the cell block in wild arcs. For one awful second, the light landed on the bunk inside holding B, and I saw myself. Not a reflection, not a trick of the light. Me, sitting on the bunk, head bowed, lips moving in time with the whispers. I couldn't breathe. My chest locked tight as I scrambled to grab the light again. When I lifted it, the bunk was empty. Dust, nothing else. But the voices hadn't stopped. Now they were laughing. A thin, broken laughter that scraped against my skull. Dozens of them, all weaving together, and above it all, my own voice whispering over and over. Still here. Still here. Still here. I ran. I didn't care about the noise. Didn't care about the way the whispers rose into a frenzy behind me. My boots pounded the tile, carrying me back toward the metal door. But as I reached for the handle, I froze. Every key on the wall of hooks was gone. Every single one. The tags dangled empty, swinging in unison like something had just taken them all at once. The whispers rose higher, filling the hall, the names overlapping into chaos. I pressed my hands against my ears, but it didn't matter. They weren't just around me anymore. They were inside me. I forced the door open and stumbled into the hallway. My flashlight beam tore across the office glass. The logbook sat open on the desk, and on the page in dark, fresh ink, a single line waited. Prisoner count 7, names logged. Last entry, my name. I don't remember running out. Don't remember driving home. All I remember is the feeling that I hadn't escaped anything, because I can still hear them, even now. Every night when the world goes quiet, the whispers creep back. Names I don't know, names I can't forget, and always mine, louder than the rest. I think I understand now. The last prisoner never left, and it's me. I never thought I'd find myself standing in a police dispatch room after midnight. Most people would call that stupid, and maybe they're right, but urban exploration had always been my thing. Abandoned houses, forgotten factories, even the occasional derelict church. I liked places that still carried an echo of what they used to be. But this was different. The station had been closed for years, left behind like it was nothing. You'd expect the city to strip it bare, clear out the furniture, cut the power. Instead, it just sat there, fading in the dark. I'd already wandered through the holding cells, the locker rooms, the offices, each one littered with papers and broken chairs. The air was thick with dust, and the silence pressed against my ears until I swore I could hear my own blood moving. That was when I found the dispatch room. The door was marked Communications. The lettering was cracked. flaking from age. When I pushed it open, the smell hit me first. A mix of old electronics and mildew, like wet metal and burned wires. The room stretched out wider than I expected, lined with desks and consoles. Rows of radios sat like frozen soldiers, each one covered in dust thick enough to smear with a finger. The walls were pinned with maps of the county, their corners curling and yellow. Coffee mugs still sat beside keyboards, fossilized rings of black at the bottom. But the thing that stopped me cold was the sound, a faint hiss. I thought at first it was my imagination, the way silence can sometimes buzz in your ears. But no, the noise came from the far end of the room. One of the radios, buried under layers of dust, still glowed faintly. Its little green light pulsed like a heartbeat. I froze, staring. How could it still have power? I stepped closer. The console hummed softly, low and steady, like something asleep but not dead. A battered sticker on the side read, "Property of County Communications." I brushed away the dust, and the hiss grew sharper. It wasn't silence anymore. It was static. I shouldn't have touched the dial. I know that now. But in that moment, I felt drawn in, like I had to hear what was buried beneath the noise. I twisted it slowly. The hiss shifted, rising and falling like a tide. For a moment, there was nothing. And then a crack. A burst of something that almost sounded like a voice. I leaned in. My heart felt too heavy for my chest. "Copy!" That was all. One word, broken, half-eaten by static, but it was there. I jerked back, staring at the radio. The station had been abandoned for over a decade. There couldn't be anyone on the other side. I told myself it was interference. Some random frequency bouncing in from miles away. Maybe a trucker, maybe a ham radio. That was possible. That was logical, but I didn't leave. I pulled out the chair, its legs screeching across the tile, and sat down. The console groaned when I touched it like it had been waiting too long. I pressed the mic button without thinking, my thumb trembling against the plastic. "Hello?" I whispered. My voice cracked. Nothing. Just static, hissing, and empty. I told myself that was good, that silence meant nobody heard me. But then the light on the console flickered. Once, twice, like an answer, and the static broke again. 10-4. The voice was male, low, drawn out like someone half asleep. I stared at the speaker, my hand frozen on the desk. My mouth went dry. 10-4. A cop code. Affirmative. I forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow even to me. "Yeah, right," I muttered, trying to convince myself it was just bleed over from some other channel. Some cop in another county. Some relic of a signal. But then the voice came again. "Dispatch, you copy?" The room tilted. My vision swam. I shouldn't have answered. But I did. "This is, hello?" The hiss swallowed my words. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then the reply came, slower this time. "You're late." I stopped breathing. The hairs on my arms lifted as if the air itself had teeth. Late for what? I shoved the chair back, my knees slamming into the desk. The noise rattled through the room, but the radio didn't care. The voice kept going, calm and heavy. "Unit 2-1. Report. Location." My skin crawled. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave right then, but something pinned me in place. A weight in my chest, a pull I couldn't name. I swallowed hard, leaning toward the mic again. My hand shook so bad I almost dropped it. "This station, it's empty," I whispered. My own voice sounded like it wasn't mine. Nobody's here. For a long moment, the static stretched. Endless, unbroken. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Then, faint and distant, I heard it. Laughter. Not loud. Not joyful. Just a small broken laugh buried under the noise. "Always here," the voice said. The green light flickered, dimmed, then steadied again. I couldn't move. Couldn't think, because for the first time I realized it wasn't some random cop on the other end. It wasn't a stray signal. Whoever it was, they were talking to me, and they knew I was there. I should have left that night. I should have walked out of the dispatch room and never looked back. But I didn't. Something about that faint green light had me hooked, like it was the only living thing in the whole station. I told myself it was just curiosity, just me wanting to figure out how the radio still worked after all these years. But deep down, I think I already knew it wasn't about the radio at all. It was about what was waiting on the other side. I sat back down in the chair. My palms were damp against the armrests, the plastic tacky with age. The static hummed low, steady like a pulse. I kept staring at the dial as if it might twitch again. I wanted silence. I prayed for silence, but silence never came. Instead, the speaker popped once, twice, then roared to life. At first, I thought it was just more interference, a wash of sound broken and jagged. But then the noise sharpened, split into a voice, a woman's voice, thin, trembling. Hello? Please, someone. I froze. My blood ran cold, my whole body locking tight. It wasn't a cop. It wasn't a code. It was a call. A 911 call. Please. The voice broke again, sharp with terror. I'm in the building. Oh, God, I can hear them. Please, send someone. My throat dried out. I gripped the mic so hard my knuckles ached. She said she was in the building. This building. I forced myself to lean in, my voice barely a whisper. Where are you? Static swallowed the words, buzzing so loud it rattled in my skull. For a second, I thought the call was gone. Then her voice came again, clearer this time, rising and falling like she was moving. The hall. Oh, God. The hall with the cells. There! Her words cut, mangled by the hiss. Then, watching me, the air in the room seemed to thin out. My chest tightened. I pictured the cell block I had walked through before, empty bars and dust, shadows crawling across the walls. I had felt watched too, but hearing her say it made the memory unbearable. They're whispering, she cried. Why won't they stop? Please, someone come get me. Her voice cracked into sobs, wet and raw, like every word scraped her throat. I pressed the mic, desperate. My own fear tangled with hers. I hear you. Stay calm. Tell me your name. Where exactly are you? The line hissed. Then a pause. Then faintly, They said my name. I shivered so hard the chair rattled beneath me. Who said your name? No answer. Only the crackle of static filling the room like a storm. I leaned forward, mic shaking in my hand. Who's with you? Tell me where you are and I'll help you. Her reply came sudden, sharp, cutting through the hiss like a knife. Don't let them put me in there. Every hair on my body stood on end. My stomach turned cold. In where? I asked, my voice breaking. The radio screamed back with a blast of noise so loud I flinched, covering my ears. Then silence. Dead air. The green light flickered, dimmed, steadied, but the voice was gone. I sat frozen in the chair, staring at the console. My heartbeat was the only sound left, too loud, too uneven. The dispatch room around me seemed to breathe, shadows pressing closer in the corners. I wanted to run. Every part of me screamed to get up and walk away, but I couldn't. Because what if she was still out there? What if she was trapped in the same building with me right now? I pressed the mic again, my words clumsy and thin. Hello? Are you there? Can you hear me? Talk to me. Static. I twisted the dial, searching, begging for her voice to return. Nothing but empty hiss, then a faint thump. Not through the radio, not through the speaker, from the hallway outside the room. I froze. My breath caught sharp in my chest. The sound was dull, heavy, like a door shutting far away. I told myself it was the building settling, pipes, old wood, anything but what it really sounded like. Footsteps, slow, dragging, getting closer. The chair groaned under me as I turned toward the door, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The dispatch consoles around me all hummed low, their dead lights flickering faintly as if something stirred in their circuits. Then the radio snapped back on. Please, her voice again, closer, sharper. Don't let them put me in there. My chest tightened so bad it hurt. I raised the mic, whispering into it like a child begging a prayer. In where? Tell me where you are. Her voice cracked into the room. High and desperate. The cell, they're bringing me back, please. Don't let them! Her scream cut the rest short. Torn away by static so sharp it burned, I dropped the mic. It hit the desk with a dull crack, swinging on its cord. The sound of her scream still echoed in my ears, blending with the silence. I couldn't move, couldn't even think, because part of me knew the truth. She wasn't calling from outside. She wasn't calling from miles away. She was here, somewhere in the building, and if she was trapped, then so was I. I should have left after that call. I told myself I would. I even stood up, chair legs scraping against the tile, ready to walk out. But my body wouldn't move farther than the doorway. My ears strained back toward the radios, waiting, hoping it was over. It wasn't. The static rose again. Not faint this time, not subtle. It roared out like a storm breaking through the walls. My head pounded with the sound, but buried deep inside it was another voice. Dispatch. This is Unit 47. We need backup now. Repeat. We need backup in the south corridor. My chest went cold. The voice was sharp, panicked, a man's voice, breathless and raw. I grabbed the edge of the desk like it could anchor me. South corridor. That was here. I tried to tell myself it was old. Just a recording, some forgotten tape bleeding through. But the tone in his voice, God, it didn't feel like the past. It felt live. The mic dangled on its cord in front of me. My hand reached for it without thinking. Like the urge to reply wasn't mine, but something planted inside me. Unit 47, I said, voice trembling. I hear you. Static swallowed the words. For a moment, I thought that was it. Then the speaker exploded again with noise, louder this time. Officer down! Officer down in the hall? His voice cracked, muffled by chaos on the other side. I could hear scuffling, metal crashing, someone shouting far away. Then a scream cut sharp, tearing the air in half. My blood ran to ice. The scream wasn't just sound. It carried weight, like it pulled me closer to the console. Dispatch! The man's voice roared. They're in here with us! His words cut, jagged by static. Then faintly, don't let them lock me in. My knees nearly buckled. It was the same words the woman had cried. The same terror, spilling from someone else's mouth. I gripped the mic with both hands, whispering through my dry throat. Where are you? Tell me where you are. Nothing. The static surged, rattling the glass in the room, then dipped into silence. For a moment, I thought it was over, that maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But then, so softly I almost missed it, came a whisper. Behind you. I spun in the chair, flashlight beam trembling across the dark. Empty walls, desks layered in dust. No movement. Nothing alive, but the air, God, the air shifted. Thick, like someone had just stepped out of sight. I snapped back toward the radios, heart hammering. The consoles all hummed now, faint green lights blinking to life across the row like eyes opening in the dark. And then, another voice. Dispatch, this is Unit 31, copy. I've got an officer down. He's bleeding bad. We need EMS in the building immediately. The hair on the back of my neck rose, another call. Another officer. I wanted to shout that it wasn't real, that nobody was coming, that this place had been dead for years, but my mouth wouldn't work. All I could do was listen as the scene unfolded through the speakers. Stay with me. Don't close your eyes. Hey, stay awake. Damn it! The man's voice cracked with desperation. In the background, I heard gurgling breaths, wet and shallow. A man dying, right there on the line. Then came a sound I'll never forget. The clink of keys, metal sliding against metal, and a door slamming shut. The line went dead. I sat there, gripping the mic like a lifeline, staring at the faint glow of the radios. My throat ached. My body wanted to move, to run, to escape, but I couldn't, because part of me knew these weren't just echoes. They weren't just recordings. The officers were here, still calling, still dying, still trapped. The room went still again. The silence felt alive like it was holding its breath. And then the speaker cracked sharp, the voice urgent, commanding, Dispatch! Officer down! Shots fired in the east wing. Copy, we need backup now. Another voice, different but no less real. My chest heaved as I pressed the mic. My words a whisper. There's no backup. No one's coming. For a second, the static hissed like laughter. Then the voice returned, clearer than before. Your dispatch. I let go of the mic like it had burned me. The room spun, my thoughts unraveling. That wasn't just a call, that was a reply. They weren't just screaming into the void. They were talking to me. The air seemed to close in tighter. I could smell something faint beneath the dust, copper, sharp and metallic. The smell of blood. I stumbled back from the desk, my light darting across the walls. My mind screamed to leave, to get out before the voices dragged me in too. But the radios weren't done. The green lights flickered one after another, all across the room until every console was glowing faintly. The static rose in a chorus, filling the dispatch center with 100 overlapping voices. Some shouted for backup. Some whispered names. Some cried out in pain, but one line cut through them all, over and over, loud enough to shake the room. "Officer down! Officer down! Officer down!" The words looped, repeating endlessly as if the building itself was stuck on that moment. I clapped my hands to my ears, but it didn't help. The voices weren't just in the radios anymore. They were in the walls. In my head, "Officer down! Officer down! Officer down!" The words pressed deeper, until I couldn't tell if I was hearing them or saying them myself. And in that dizzy, suffocating moment, I realized the truth. This place wasn't abandoned. It was still working. Still dispatching calls, still replaying the last moments of everyone who had ever fallen inside its walls. And now it had me, listening. Dispatch never sleeps. I thought the worst had already passed. I thought hearing an officer scream through a dead radio was the peak of what this place could do to me. But I was wrong. That was just the beginning. It started small, just a faint hiss, the kind of white noise you'd expect from an old machine left to rot. I told myself it was harmless. Background noise, nothing more. But then the hiss grew teeth. The static wasn't steady anymore. It shifted, swelled, broke into patterns. It sounded almost like breathing, slow, ragged inhalations buried beneath the crackle. The more I listened, the clearer it became. And then, voices, not one, not two, dozens. They didn't come all at once. They slipped in gradually, like something crawling through cracks in the wall. A whisper here, a groan there. Words tangled with distortion, half heard, half imagined. Copy. Can't breathe. Don't leave me. My throat tightened as the voices bled together, overlapping. I pressed my palms to my ears, but it didn't matter. The sound wasn't just coming from the radios anymore. It was inside the room, inside my skull. Some were sharp, clipped like radio codes. Some were stretched, warped into inhuman moans. And some sounded like people I almost recognized. Voices I thought I'd heard in passing during my own time on the job. The line between memory and reality blurred. At first, I tried to follow the codes, to piece them together like I'd done 1,000 times during late-night dispatch shifts. But the numbers looped and twisted, repeating themselves until they lost meaning. 10 to 50. Officer needs assist. 1050. Officer needs assist. 1050. The same call, looping endlessly. No address, no end. The more it repeated, the more broken it became. Until the words weren't words anymore. Just a mechanical chant, like the building was chewing them up and spitting them back out. A thicker. Down! Off! Down! 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 I slammed the volume knob, twisting it off, but the voices didn't stop. They bled through the silence, clearer than ever. And that's when the screaming started. It came without warning, sharp, guttural, raw. Not one scream, but many, layered on top of each other, rising and falling in waves. Men, women, some so young it made my stomach turn. I stumbled back, clutching the edge of the desk, trying to steady myself. It wasn't just noise, it felt directed. Like every scream carried weight, pressing down on me, forcing me to listen. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to tear out of that room and never look back. But I couldn't. My body was locked in place. Ears straining as though some part of me believed if I just listened closely enough, I could understand. And I did. Beneath the chaos, beneath the endless cries, there were sentences. Broken, yes, but clear enough to freeze me where I stood. Dispatch, copy. They locked us in. Help me. Please don't let me die here. Why didn't you answer sooner? The last one sank its teeth deep. Why didn't you answer sooner? I felt the words carved straight into my chest. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? I hadn't answered. Not fast enough. Not strong enough. Not when it mattered most. The guilt clawed up old memories I'd buried deep. The nights I'd worked dispatch for real, when lives depended on my voice and my decisions. I remembered the hesitation, the seconds lost in confusion, the calls where I'd never learned if help had arrived in time. The voices dragged them back, twisting them into accusations. Dispatch? Where were you? You left us. You left me. I pressed my hands harder against my ears, nails digging into skin, but the sound only grew sharper. The static pulsed in rhythm now, like a heartbeat. Louder, faster, erratic. Each beat carried more voices, more fragments. Some I couldn't understand. Foreign words, guttural syllables that scraped against my brain. Others looped endlessly. 1099, 1099, 1099. Signal lost, signal lost, signal lost. The repetition drove me to the edge. My vision blurred, black spots crowding the edges. The whole room seemed to tilt, the radios pulsing like they were alive, like they were breathing with the voices inside them. I whispered to myself, barely audible. This isn't real. This isn't real. It can't be. But then one voice cut through, sharp and unmistakable, my own. It was faint at first, buried in the static, but I recognized it instantly. My cadence, my tone, my breathing. "Dispatch, do you copy?" it said. "Dispatch, respond." I froze. My stomach lurched. It repeated louder, more desperate, overlapping with the rest. "Dispatch, do you copy? Do you copy? Do you copy?" My legs buckled and I dropped to my knees, the flashlight clattering against the floor. The beam spun wildly, carving dizzy shadows across the walls. I wanted to scream back at it. I wanted to beg it to shut up. But my throat locked, paralyzed by the horror of hearing myself trapped inside the loop. That's when I realized the voices weren't just the past. They were pulling me in. Each phrase, each broken cry, it wasn't random. It was a net, casting wider, dragging in anything it could. The more I listened, the more pieces of me they caught. My words, my memories, my fear. I backed away from the consoles, crawling on the floor, heart slamming against my ribs. But no matter how far I moved, the voices followed. "Don't leave me! Stay awake! Behind you!" Dispatch. Always ending with that word. Dispatch. Like they weren't calling for help anymore. They were calling me. The room felt smaller with every breath, the walls pressing in, the static filling every crack. My mind reeled, desperate for silence, for air, for something that didn't carry a voice, but silence never came. Only the endless, looping chaos. Only the screaming and the codes, only the voices. Whispering, crying, demanding, and somewhere in the middle of it all, mine, trapped. Repeating, becoming part of them. And in that moment, as the static roared so loud I couldn't even hear my own thoughts, one truth sank deeper than all the others. The building wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by calls, calls that never stopped, never ended, never let go. And now, one of those calls was mine. I don't know how long I stayed there in that room, crouched on the floor with my palms pressed to my ears, trying to shut out the static. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. Time didn't work right anymore. It stretched and folded in ways I couldn't measure. But eventually, something inside me snapped. A small, broken thought cut through the chaos. I have to leave. The idea became an anchor. If I stayed, I'd lose myself. I'd drown in the voices until I wasn't me anymore. Just another loop, another call repeating forever. I forced myself up, legs shaking, chest burning. The radios were still alive, spitting their madness into the air, but I couldn't let them hold me there any longer. My flashlight beam jittered across the consoles, the walls, the door. I stumbled toward it like a man crawling out of a grave. The hallway outside was silent, and that silence nearly knocked the air out of me. No whispers, no static, no screaming, just emptiness. For a second, I almost cried with relief. But silence in a place like that doesn't feel clean. It doesn't comfort you. It weighs on you, pressing against your skin until it feels like something is hiding just beneath it. I kept moving, step after step, toward the exit. Every doorway I passed felt like it was watching me. Every flicker of my light made me clench my jaw harder. I whispered to myself, "Almost there. Just get out. Just get out." And then I heard it, a faint crackle. I froze. The sound was behind me. Not from the dispatch room, not echoing down the hall. It was closer. I turned slowly, the beam of my flashlight shaking, cutting across peeling paint and rusted lockers. Nothing. Just the hall stretching back into dark. Then the sound came again. Sharper this time. The radio clipped to the old belt hanging on the wall. It wasn't supposed to work. It wasn't supposed to have power. I'd seen those radios earlier, lifeless, their batteries long dead, but now, one of them was alive. The speaker hissed, then cleared, and a voice spilled out. My voice! Dispatch, copy! I froze, my body locked. The sound of me, my own tone, my own breath, echoed down the empty hall. Dispatch, can you hear me? Please, someone respond, it was me. Not just similar, exact, every syllable carved out of my throat. I stumbled back a step, heart slamming against my ribs. I wanted to scream that it wasn't real, that it couldn't be, but the words kept coming. I'm trapped. I can't find the way out. Please don't leave me in here. I dropped the flashlight. The beam rolled along the floor, throwing dizzy shadows across the walls. I pressed my back to the cold plaster, shaking my head. No, I whispered. That's not me. That's not me. But the voice didn't stop. It begged. It pleaded. It cracked with desperation I recognized too well, because I knew exactly how I sounded when fear scraped me raw. Help me, it said. Please, I don't want to die in here, please. I clutched my temples, grinding my teeth until my jaw ached. I knew if I listened too long, if I let that voice dig into me, I'd believe it. I'd follow it, and maybe that was the point. I forced myself to move, to step away, to keep pushing toward the exit. My boots scuffed against the floor, each step a battle against the sound trailing me. The radio crackled louder, almost mocking. Don't leave. You can't leave. You belong here. You're one of us now. That last line, hearing it in my own voice, nearly broke me. I staggered down the hall, half running, half tripping, until I saw the door at the far end. The exit, the way out. But just as my hand reached for the rusted push bar, every radio in the building came alive at once. The dispatch consoles, the handhelds on the belts, even the speakers mounted high in the corners of the hall. All of them lit up. All of them speaking with my voice. Dispatch, respond. Dispatch, copy. Please don't leave me here. Please, please, please. The building roared with me. Hundreds of me. A chorus of desperation and rage. I covered my ears, but it didn't matter. The sound was inside me now, rattling my bones, vibrating my teeth. I pushed the door, but it didn't budge. I shoved harder, slamming my shoulder into it. Nothing. Behind me, the voices twisted. They grew sharper, darker, less human. My own words melted into snarls and screeches, warped echoes of myself. Dispatch, they growled. Don't leave. You're already here. I turned, chest heaving, sweat dripping down my spine. The hall looked longer now, stretching out like it had no end. And in the middle of it, shapes, not clear, not solid, just outlines moving through the dark. Some crouched. Some dragged themselves. Some leaned against the walls like broken officers too tired to stand, and every one of them spoke with my voice. I stumbled back against the door, my knees weak. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt like it had already been stolen. And then, clearer than all the rest, I heard it. Transmission ended. The words came like a final stamp, a verdict. And when they echoed through the building, the others went quiet. All at once. The silence after was worse than the noise. I turned back to the door. My shaking hand pressed against the metal bar one more time. And this time, it gave way. The door creaked open into the cold night air. I staggered out, gasping, falling to my knees on cracked concrete. The sky above looked the same as it always had. Dark, starless, heavy. The building loomed behind me, its windows black. But I couldn't shake it. Even as I breathed in the night air, even as I put distance between myself and that cursed dispatch room, I could still hear it faintly, not the screams, not the chaos. Just one voice, my voice, whispering in the static carried on the wind. Dispatch, do you copy? And deep down, I knew, no matter how far I walked, no matter how much I tried to forget, part of me never left that building. Part of me was still inside, and it always would be. I never should have gone into that police station. Everyone in town said it was bad news, that the place was cursed, that no one with sense had a reason to go near it. But I've never been good at listening to warnings. The building had been sitting there for years, dark and hollow, like a mouth with missing teeth. The windows were boarded up on the outside, but I'd found a gap near the back where someone had pried the wood loose. I told myself I was just curious, just looking. But the truth was, I wanted to know what they left behind. You hear rumors, you know. People said when the department shut down overnight, they didn't take everything. Evidence, files, maybe even guns. The kind of things no one's supposed to touch. I stepped inside, the air heavy with dust and mold. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, sliding over cracked tile, peeling paint, and broken chairs tipped over in the hall. I passed through offices first. Papers scattered across desks, calendars frozen on dates from over a decade ago. It all looked paused, like the people who worked there had just stood up and walked out mid-sentence. But it wasn't until I found the steel door at the end of the hall that I felt my pulse pick up. The sign bolted to the wall said, "Evidence Room." The lock was broken, hanging rusted, useless. Someone had been here before me, but the door itself was shut tight. I leaned my shoulder into it and shoved. The hinges screamed, and the smell that rolled out nearly knocked me back. It wasn't rot, not fresh, not sharp. More like time itself had been locked inside too long. A stale, closed-in smell of cardboard, leather, and something else underneath that I couldn't quite place. I stepped inside. Rows of shelves stretched across the room, lit only by my flashlight. Dust thick enough to smother. Bags lined up neatly, some tagged with faded handwriting, some stacked in cardboard boxes with numbers stamped across the sides. And it was full. Completely full. For all the stories about looters and vandals, no one had touched this place. It felt wrong, almost sacred, like crossing into a graveyard where the dead were still listening. I walked down the first aisle, my light sliding across the bags. Inside were knives, guns wrapped in plastic, wallets stained dark, shirts folded with brown spots that could only be blood. Each item had a little card, yellowing with age, tied with string. Case numbers, dates, sometimes just a word: robbery, assault, homicide. I don't know why, but reading them made me feel like I was being watched. Like the people connected to those objects weren't gone, not really. Like they knew I was here, touching what they left behind. I stopped at one bag in particular. Inside was a pair of broken glasses, the lenses cracked, one arm bent out at a sharp angle. The tag tied to it was barely legible, but I made out a single word: victim. My hand tightened on the flashlight. I told myself not to think about it, not to imagine what those glasses had last seen, but I couldn't stop. Every bag, every box was a story cut short, a moment sealed away. And standing there, I felt like I was opening them again just by looking. Deeper into the room, I found stranger things. A child's shoe, scuffed and smeared. A necklace snapped clean in half. A hammer with dried flecks on the head. The tag marked burglary assault. And then there were the bags with no descriptions at all. Just numbers. Those made my stomach twist. I knelt and shined my light over one, peeling back the tag to see if maybe the ink had just faded. But no, it was blank except for the stamped code. Almost like someone didn't want it remembered. Inside the bag was a doll, old, with a cracked porcelain face, its left eye missing, its dress torn, stiff with dark stains. I dropped the bag back onto the shelf before I even realized I was letting go. The sound of it hitting the metal echoed too loud, bouncing down the rows. And that's when I noticed something. The silence. When I first entered, the place had been dead quiet. My footsteps, my breathing, the occasional creak of the shelves, that was all. But now, the silence had weight. It pressed down on me deeper than before, like the room itself was holding its breath. I whispered to myself, it's just a room. Just shelves and bags, nothing else. But I didn't believe it. I took a step back, and my boot crunched on something small. When I looked down, I saw a piece of paper, yellowed, crumpled at the edges. I picked it up. It wasn't a tag. It was a note. The handwriting was jagged, rushed, barely readable. But I made out the words. Do not move evidence. Do not touch. They follow what you touch. My throat closed. I dropped the note like it burned and stepped back fast, bumping into the shelf behind me. Bags rattled, shifting. plastic scraping. I froze, listening. For a second, I swore I heard something faint, too faint to be real, like the soft scuff of footsteps just beyond the shelves. I swung my light that way. Heart hammering, nothing, just more rouse. More evidence waiting in the dark, I whispered again, softer this time, like I was afraid something would hear me. It's just a building. That's all. But deep down, I knew it wasn't true. The evidence hadn't been forgotten. It hadn't been abandoned. It had been waiting. And now that I'd touched it, maybe it wasn't waiting anymore. I should have left right then. After I saw that note, I should have dropped the flashlight and crawled back through the gap in the boards. But instead, I kept walking. I don't know if it was curiosity, or fear, or something else pulling me deeper. But the shelves stretched on, row after row, and I couldn't stop myself from looking. Each tag, each bag felt heavier than the last, like the weight of all those cases was pressing down on me, and then halfway through one of the rows, I saw it. The bag wasn't like the others. It wasn't stacked neatly or set in place with care. It leaned awkwardly, almost shoved onto the shelf, the plastic crinkled and loose. The tag dangled, half torn, as though someone had yanked it. Inside was a police uniform, dark navy blue, the fabric stiff with dried blood. The shirt was torn at the chest, the sleeves shredded in places. A badge still clung to the pocket, dull and scratched, but legible enough to make my stomach twist. The tag tied to it was stained, but I could still read the name written there. Officer H. Rowe. I whispered it out loud before I even realized I had. Rowe. The sound of the name in my own voice felt wrong. Too loud. I lifted the flashlight and swept the beam along the nearest wall, just trying to get my bearings again. And that's when I saw it. The name carved into the paint. Not once. Not small. But over and over. Gouged deep into the plaster in jagged lines. Row. 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 The letters climbed up the wall, scratched into every patch of space like whoever did it had been desperate, frantic. Some carvings were shallow, rushed. Others were deep enough to cut straight into the brick. I swallowed hard, throat dry. It wasn't just coincidence. The name in the bag, the name on the wall. Whoever Officer Rowe had been, they hadn't been forgotten. Not by this place. I turned back to the bag, my flashlight trembling across the uniform. The blood on it had long since dried, but the way it stiffened the fabric made me sick to my stomach. My eyes caught on something, a tear across the chest pocket. The fabric wasn't just ripped. It looked clawed, like something had dragged sharp fingers down through the cloth, tearing it open in one violent motion. I backed away, my boot scraping against the concrete floor. The sound echoed far too loud. I tried to steady my breathing. It's old, I muttered. Just an old case. Just evidence. But the air felt thicker now, pressing down harder, like the room itself was listening. I thought about the note I'd found. They follow what you touch. My eyes darted back to the bag. I hadn't touched it, not yet. But my light was on it. My attention fixed, and it felt like that was almost the same thing. I forced myself to turn away, to keep moving. The shelves closed in tighter as I went deeper, the air colder, heavier. My footsteps echoed back at me in a way that didn't quite match, and then I heard it. A scrape. Soft. Low. Like fabric dragging against concrete, I froze, every muscle locking in place. My light swung back toward the shelves. The uniform in the bag had shifted. It wasn't lying flat anymore. It was tilted, the sleeve pressed against the plastic. The fabric bunched as though something inside had pressed against it. I felt bile rise in my throat. My body screamed at me to run, to get out before I saw more than I could handle. But my legs wouldn't move. Instead, I lifted the flashlight higher and traced the beam across the far wall again. More carvings. Not just Rowe's name anymore. There were other words. Scattered between the gouged letters. Some half-finished. Some nearly illegible. But a few stood out sharp enough to make my heart lurch. Trapped. Bleeding. Still here. I staggered back, nearly knocking into the shelves behind me. The bags rattled and shifted, the sound rolling down the row like a shiver. I spun, my light flashing across rows and rows of evidence, each shelf stacked with the remnants of crimes I didn't want to imagine. But the feeling only grew stronger that someone was watching me, Not from the shadows. Not from behind the shelves. From the bags themselves. I forced myself back toward the front of the room, my chest tight, sweat slicking my palms. But every time I turned, my light caught on the bag with the uniform, and each time it looked different, the sleeve a little higher, the torn pocket pulled a little wider. And once, just for a second, I thought I saw the faintest impression of a hand pressed against the inside of the plastic. I nearly dropped the light. My breath came fast, ragged, the air burning in my lungs. I stumbled toward the door, desperate to leave the shelves behind. But before I stepped through, I glanced back one last time. I don't know why. Maybe because some part of me still wanted proof. Maybe because I already knew I wouldn't escape the image unless I faced it. The uniform in the bag was standing, not fully, not upright, but pulled halfway against the plastic, the sleeves stretched, the collar pressing forward like a body was inside it, pushing to get out. And on the wall behind it, carved deeper than any other word, was one last message: let me out. The light flickered. My hands shook so hard the beam jittered across the shelves, across the names, across the bags, and when the flashlight steadied again, the bag with the uniform was flat, perfectly still, like nothing had happened at all. But I knew better. The evidence wasn't just sitting there. It wasn't just waiting, it was watching me, and I had already given it my attention. I should have left after the uniform. I should have taken the warning for what it was. But leaving never feels that simple when you're inside a place like that. It doesn't let you go easy. The deeper I went, the heavier the air became. I couldn't stop thinking about the walls. Those words carved over and over, the name pressed into the plaster like a desperate prayer. The sight of it clung to me. It stuck in my head like a splinter. And then something new started happening. It was subtle at first. Just a space, a gap where a bag should have been. I noticed it when I swept my flashlight across a low shelf. Empty, the tag string still dangling, but no bag, no evidence. I frowned. Maybe I missed it. Maybe I had passed by too quick. But when I turned back, there it was. Just an empty space where something should have been locked away. I moved on, unease prickling at the back of my neck. And then I saw another, a bag that had been there a moment before. Gone. The string still tied to the shelf, swinging ever so slightly, as though it had just been taken. I whispered out loud, "No." My voice sounded hollow. One by one, the shelves started changing. It didn't happen fast. It wasn't some sudden vanishing trick. It was slower, crueler, like the room wanted me to see. Each row I passed had gaps that hadn't been there before. Tags dangling, bags missing. The more I looked, the clearer it became. It wasn't random. The bags weren't just disappearing. They were being released. It was like someone was checking them out again, like an officer pulling them for another case. Only there were no officers, no clerks, no one else in that station. Just me. I swallowed hard and kept walking, my light catching on the nearest shelf. The tag still clung to the empty spot. The handwriting faded, but readable. Knife case, 4427. The next gap held another. Tag photographs, case 3891, and another. Pistol, case 5E142. I stopped reading after that. My mind started filling in the blanks, imagining each missing piece slipping back into the world outside. A bloody knife returned to a waiting hand. A gun, its weight warm and familiar in someone's grip. Evidence. Things once tied to crimes. Things once locked away because they had already taken lives. Now, walking back out into the streets, the shelves groaned around me, the old wood creaking like it was breathing. Each step I took felt like I was walking through a morgue where the bodies weren't resting anymore. I told myself I wasn't seeing it right, that maybe the bags had rotted away or the station had been looted years ago, but I couldn't lie to myself. Not with the tag still there, not with the faint sway of the strings, like invisible hands had only just pulled them free. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. They were faint, scattered, echoing from somewhere deeper in the room. A shuffle of soles across concrete, slow, measured. I froze, holding my breath. My flashlight beam jittered across the rows, landing on more empty shelves, more strings, more spaces where the past used to sit. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. I whispered, "Who's there?" My voice cracked on the last word. No answer. I should have left. I should have run back the way I came. But something kept me there. Something like dread. Something like obligation. I had already seen too much. The evidence was gone. Yes, but not lost. Released. The thought sank in deep, coiling inside me until I could hardly breathe. And then the radio crackled. I didn't have a radio on me. The sound came from the far side of the room, a burst of static echoing from behind the shelves. My light caught the faint glint of metal, a small square police radio sitting on the floor. It shouldn't have worked. The building had been abandoned for years, but it hissed and sputtered like it was alive. Through the static came a voice, garbled at first, then clearer. Evidence logged, released back to the streets. The voice was flat, official, like some automated message. Another pause. Then another line. Case reopened. Case continues. My skin crawled. The voice looped again, repeating the same lines, sometimes clear, sometimes drowned in static. It sounded less like an officer and more like an echo, like the memory of someone who had said it long ago. I stared at the shelves, my throat tight. The bags weren't just missing. They had been processed, signed out. The crimes weren't over. They were starting again. I staggered back, nearly tripping over my own feet. The flashlight beam swung wildly, cutting across shelves, tags, strings. Each empty space looked wider now, darker. I imagined the items moving through the city, finding their way back to the people who had once used them, or worse, into the hands of someone new, and somewhere inside me, a darker thought took root. What if the items weren't just released? What if they were hunting their way back? The bloody uniform flashed in my head. Officer Rowe's name carved over and over on the wall. The desperate plea. Let me out. Had his uniform found him again? Or was it looking for someone else? The sound of the radio deepened, the static rumbling, the words slurring into each other until they sounded more like whispers than sentences. My pulse hammered so loud it filled my ears. Released! Released! Released. The word wouldn't stop. I turned to leave, forcing myself back toward the boarded gap where I'd come in. My light swung over one last shelf before I reached the exit, and my stomach dropped. The bag I had first seen, the one with the bloodied uniform, was gone. The shelf sat empty. Only the tag dangled there, swinging gently, as though someone had just checked it out. The radio hissed louder behind me, spitting out words in bursts. Uniform. Released. Back to the streets. My knees nearly buckled. My throat tightened until I could hardly breathe. The officer wasn't trapped anymore. He was out there. The city would never know what had been unlocked. The people walking home from work. The families asleep in their houses. The children playing in their yards. They'd never know that the past wasn't past anymore. And I had seen it. I had watched it leave. I stumbled out of the evidence room, my chest heaving, my ears ringing with the sound of that last message. Released back to the streets. The shelves of the abandoned station weren't emptying. They were opening, and I knew then, no matter where I went, I'd never stop wondering which piece of evidence would find me. The first thing I noticed about the hallway was how narrow it felt. It wasn't actually small. The old police station had plenty of space. But the way the light fell across the walls made it feel like I was being pressed in from both sides. My flashlight beam stretched forward, catching dust floating thick in the air, and then it landed on them. The faces, rows and rows of mugshots, pinned carelessly to corkboards that ran the entire length of the hall. At first, I thought they were just old notices, flyers. But when I stepped closer, I saw the heavy photo paper. The stamped dates at the bottom corners, the case numbers. Each one was a mugshot, black and white, faded from time. Men, women, even some that looked far too young. Each of them staring straight at the camera, stiff against a blank wall. And each one was the same in one detail. The eyes were gone, scratched out, not blacked with ink, not burned, scratched. Thin, jagged gouges dug right into the glossy paper, tearing the sockets to white shreds. some deep enough to rip through the corkboard beneath. My stomach turned as I reached for the nearest one. The man in the photo looked ordinary, messy hair, a tired expression, but the eyes were hollowed by someone's hand. Up close, I could see the effort it must have taken. Whoever had done it had pressed hard, again and again, until the picture couldn't hold its shape anymore. I let my hand drop. My fingers felt dirty even touching the edge of the photo. I stepped back, scanning the rest of the hallway. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, every board stacked with faces that seemed to follow me, even without their eyes. And the silence in the hallway felt worse now, like all those ruined faces were holding their breath. I whispered without meaning to. "Why?" The word barely left my lips, but it echoed all the way down the corridor. I started moving, slowly, my flashlight sweeping across the boards. My shoes scuffed against the cracked linoleum, the sound far too loud in the empty space. Each mugshot was worse than the last. Some were torn in half, taped back together, and scratched out all over again. Some had whole sections of the face peeled away, leaving only a mouth or a jawline or a smear of hair. But the eyes were always destroyed, always gone. It was deliberate. I didn't know what was worse. The idea that an officer had done this, or that someone had broken in years later just to mutilate the pictures. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't random, that it meant something. Halfway down the hall, I stopped at one in particular, a woman's photo. Her hair was long, draped over one shoulder, and the scratches where her eyes should have been were so deep they'd torn clean through the corkboard, exposing the wall beneath. But what made me freeze wasn't the damage, it was her mouth. Unlike the others, hers had been left untouched, and the faintest trace of a smile was still there. It wasn't wide. It wasn't cruel. Just a small, knowing curl of the lips, as though she had been waiting for someone to notice her. I felt my chest tighten. My throat went dry. I forced myself to move past it, but the image burned in my head. That mouth. That faint smile. I thought of the officers who must have walked this hallway every day, past these same boards, past those same ruined faces. How could anyone work with that staring at them? Unless they didn't see it as wrong. Unless they had done it themselves. I shivered, gripping the flashlight tighter. The hallway stretched further than I expected. Every few feet, a new corkboard appeared, and everyone was covered in faces. Faces with gouged out eyes. Faces frozen mid-expression, robbed of the only thing that could have made them human. And then I noticed something else. Some of the mugshots weren't pinned straight. They were crooked, tilted at odd angles. I leaned in close to one. The tack was rusty, the paper frayed, but it hadn't fallen on its own. Someone had pulled it down and then pinned it back up again. The gouges in the eyes were fresh. Not years old like the rest. My stomach dropped. Someone had been here. Recently, and they had continued the ritual. I pulled back fast, the light shaking in my hand. The hallway seemed longer now, stretching away from me, lined with faces that leaned at just enough of an angle to feel wrong. I tried not to look, but I couldn't help it. The scratches seemed deeper on these, sharper. I took another step and then another. My breath was shallow, my heartbeat loud in my ears. The silence pressed in, heavier with each foot of space I crossed, and then something shifted. I swear it wasn't the building settling. It came from the boards. A faint creak, like weight shifting against wood. I froze, whipping the flashlight toward the sound. Nothing moved. The board stood still, covered in ruined faces. But the sound came again. A small groan, then silence. I realized I was staring too long at the faces. My eyes burned, my skin crawled. I forced myself to look away, but even then I felt them. Not watching, not exactly, but leaning, like the scratched-out sockets weren't empty after all. Like something was still there, pressing against the ruined paper, trying to see. I wanted to leave. Every part of me screamed to turn back, to walk out of the hallway, to breathe air that wasn't so stale and heavy with memory. But when I glanced back, the boards behind me looked worse. The light caught jagged holes where eyes had been torn, and the longer I stared, the less they looked like paper. They looked deeper, hollow, like tunnels cut straight through the faces into something else, something that could reach back. I snapped my head forward, forcing myself to keep walking. My shoes scuffed faster now, my breaths louder. The end of the hallway came into view, a door hanging slightly off its hinges. The frame around it warped with rot. Relief surged through me. I just had to get through that door. Just step past the boards, past the faces, and I'd be out. But as I neared it, my light fell across one last corkboard, and I stopped dead. Because I recognized the face. Not completely, not in detail, but enough. The jawline, the hair, the faint outline of a scar. It was me, my own mugshot pinned to the wall. The eyes were scratched out just like the rest. But the gouges were so fresh, the edges of the paper still curled outward, raw and white. I staggered back, nearly dropping the flashlight. My throat closed, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Who had done this? How could this picture exist, and why? Why were the scratches still warm when I reached out with trembling fingers? The silence around me seemed to deepen, like the hallway itself was holding its breath. I backed away, staring at the ruined photo of myself, the hollow sockets where my eyes should have been. And I understood then. This hallway wasn't just for the past. It was still collecting, still adding, and somehow it had found me. I couldn't move. The beam of my flashlight shook across the board, trembling with my hand. I stared at the photo, at my own face pinned there like I was just another suspect. Another criminal cataloged and forgotten. It was me, no doubt about it. The jaw, the uneven stubble, the scar above my brow from when I split my head open as a kid. Even the shirt I was wearing, the same one I had on right then. The only difference was the date printed in small black numbers at the bottom. That day. Not last week. Not last year. Not from some arrest I'd never known about. The date was today. My mouth went dry. My chest felt tight, like all the air had been sucked out of the hallway. I reached out before I could stop myself. My fingers brushed the edge of the paper, and it felt warm. Not just from the stale air of the building. Warm, like it had just come off a printer. The edges curled slightly, as if the ink hadn't fully dried, and the eyes scratched out. I staggered back, nearly tripping over my own feet. My light swung wildly across the hallway, flashing across other faces, other ruined sockets, but my eyes kept snapping back to that one, to mine. How could it exist? Who put it there? And why was it already ruined? Like every other picture on the wall. My heart hammered so hard I could hear the blood in my ears. I wanted to rip it down, to crumple it in my hands and shove it in my pocket, to erase it before the hallway could claim it. But some part of me knew that wouldn't help. The others were still there. All of them, even torn, even destroyed, they stayed. I wasn't sure mine would be any different. The silence pressed in around me, heavier than before. It was so quiet I could hear the scratch of my fingernails against the flashlight as I tightened my grip. And then, faintly, I heard it, not from behind me. Not from the building settling, from the walls, a soft rasping, like fingernails dragging across paper. I froze, holding my breath. It came again. A scrape, a tear, not loud, but steady, like something was clawing slowly through the corkboard. I turned the light toward the sound, scanning row after row of ruined eyes, and I saw movement. Not big, not obvious, but one of the mugshots fluttered against the board, though no air stirred in the hallway. The corner curled up, peeled back, then pressed flat again. I backed up another step. My shoes squeaked against the cracked linoleum, and the sound echoed all the way down the hall. The scraping grew louder. It wasn't just one picture, it was all of them. A chorus of tearing, scratching, clawing. Like hundreds of invisible hands were raking their nails across the paper from the inside. I whipped the light back to my photo. The scratches around the eyes had deepened. They were rawer, whiter, the edges curling outward more than they had before. Like something had kept digging. I felt sick. I felt watched even though the sockets were hollow. My skin prickled, my pulse racing. I whispered, voice shaking, "Why me?" The question barely left my mouth before the air shifted. Not a breeze. Not movement, just a pressure. A weight. As if the hallway itself leaned closer to listen. I staggered back until my shoulders hit the opposite wall. The corkboard there rattled faintly with the impact, and I felt the push of hundreds of ruined eyes at my back. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The sound of the scratching didn't stop. It only grew, filling my head, burrowing into me. I forced myself forward toward the door at the end of the hall. The hinges were warped, the frame rotted, but it was still open just enough to slip through. I didn't want to look again. I didn't want to, but something in me couldn't resist. Turned my light back to the board with my photo. The scratches around the eyes were gone. The sockets weren't torn anymore. They were black, perfectly black, not empty. Not paper, holes deep, endless holes, staring back at me. And as I stood frozen there, the faintest shape moved inside them, like something shifting just behind the darkness, something alive. My hand shook so violently the light quivered across the walls. I couldn't hold it steady, but in that trembling beam, I swore I saw the edges of a smile forming on the photo's mouth. Not mine, not the tired, nervous smile I had seen 1,000 times in the mirror. This one was sharper, hungrier, like it knew something I didn't. I stumbled backward, nearly falling into the opposite wall again. My voice cracked as I whispered, "That's not me," but the photo didn't change. The black holes where the eyes should have been only seemed deeper, pulling me in, like the paper itself was thinning and what lay behind it was waiting to reach through. I couldn't look anymore, couldn't stay another second. I shoved my shoulder against the warped door, the wood groaning as it gave way just enough for me to squeeze through. The scratching followed me, even when I stepped into the next room, even when the boards disappeared behind the rotting frame. I could still hear it faintly, fingernails against paper, against cork, and underneath it, something else. A whisper. So faint I almost didn't believe it. But it said my name over and over, slow and steady. Like all those ruined faces had finally found their voice. I always thought I'd seen every corner of that station. When you spend enough nights walking the same halls, breathing in the same dust, memorizing every stain and crack in the paint, you start to believe there's nothing left to surprise you, nothing hidden. Just a dead building wasting away with its secrets long gone. But I was wrong. It started with a draft, a faint, steady chill that brushed my ankles whenever I stood near the far wall in the evidence room. I never paid much attention to it before. The place was full of leaks and broken vents. Cold air was nothing unusual. But that night, I lingered. I pressed my hand to the wall, feeling the paint flake under my palm, and I noticed it. The air wasn't leaking from above. It was seeping from below. That didn't make sense. The blueprints I'd studied, old scans stored in the town's records, showed the building as simple. One level, with nothing but a shallow crawl space beneath it. No basement, no substructure, just ground. But as I stood there, hand against the wall, I could feel it. A pulse, not like a heartbeat, more like the faint vibration of air moving through a narrow passage. Something was underneath. I found myself crouching at the baseboard, running my fingers along the wood until I felt the edge shift under my nail. The corner piece wobbled. It came off easier than I expected. Behind it, there was a seam, almost invisible, a thin crack in the plaster that curved down in a strange arc. And that's when the thought lodged itself in my head. A staircase. The idea was ridiculous. It was too small, too unlikely. But once it was there, I couldn't let it go. I dug at the wall with a screwdriver I'd brought, scraping the plaster until chunks started breaking loose. Beneath the surface, old wood appeared, dry, splintering. And then I saw the edge of a door, not a full one, a hatch, low and narrow, hidden behind decades of careless renovation. The more I uncovered, the colder the draft became, spilling out in short bursts, like it had been waiting. My hands shook as I pulled the last piece of plaster free. The hatch creaked open, revealing a darkness that swallowed the light of my flashlight almost immediately. And there it was, a staircase, concrete steps, narrow and steep, leading straight down into the earth. The smell hit me first, damp, but not like mildew, more like stone that had been sealed away, untouched for too long. It carried the faint metallic tang of rust, or blood. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the thought stuck to me like cobwebs. I sat there staring into that pit for what felt like an hour. My mind argued with itself, one side begging me to close the hatch and pretend I never found it, the other whispering that I'd regret it forever if I turned back now. Eventually, curiosity won. I lowered myself onto the first step. The hatch groaned above me as I pulled it closed, sealing me in. The sound of it shutting was final, heavier than it should have been. For a second, I thought about going back, but then my light caught the edges of the stairs again and I realized how old they looked. Pitted, eroded, covered in a fine layer of dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. This wasn't just storage. This was something else. Each step down made the air colder. My breath fogged in the beam of the flashlight and I pulled my jacket tighter. The silence pressed in so thick that every scuff of my boots felt wrong, like I was breaking some unspoken rule. The deeper I went, the stranger it felt. The staircase wasn't long, maybe 20 steps, but halfway down I noticed something odd. The concrete walls weren't bare. Carvings lined the sides, faint and shallow, like they'd been etched with a dull blade. Shapes, symbols. Nothing I recognized. Circles split with jagged lines, figures that looked almost human but bent in unnatural ways, like they'd been drawn from memory after a nightmare. I touched one with my fingers, and the stone was colder there, biting against my skin. The thought came uninvited. These weren't just markings. They were warnings. I kept moving. At the bottom, the stairs ended in a narrow corridor, the ceiling so low I had to duck. My light traced the rough concrete until it stopped on a heavy iron door at the far end. It looked out of place. Newer than the stairs, but still old. Rust bloomed across the surface like disease, and a thick lock dangled from the handle. The draft was stronger here, pushing against my legs in steady bursts, as if the space beyond the door was breathing. I knelt to study the lock. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The dust on the floor, thick on the stairs, untouched for years, was disturbed here. Faint shoe prints trailed across it. Not many, not fresh, but real. Someone had been down here. Not recently, but not so long ago either. I couldn't move. My light shook across the prints, following them back toward the stairs. They overlapped, scattered, as if people had come and gone more than once, but all of them stopped at the door. None of them went back up. The beam of my flashlight caught the carvings again. There were more down here, clustered around the doorframe, deeper, angrier, carved so hard into the stone that flakes still littered the ground. Figures with their eyes hollowed out, circles with teeth. I didn't recognize them, but I understood what they meant. Don't go further. I should have left. I should have turned around, climbed back up, sealed the hatch, and told myself I imagined the whole thing. But instead, I stepped closer to the door. The lock was rusted through. Weak. It wouldn't take much. I reached out, my hand trembling as I wrapped my fingers around it. The cold bit into my skin, sharper than ice, and then I heard it, from the other side. A faint scrape. Slow. Steady. Like something dragging its nails along the inside of the iron. I froze, every muscle locked. The scrape came again, followed by a low thud. Something shifting, something waiting. The breath caught in my throat. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought it might give out. And then silence. Thick. Endless. I backed away slowly, my light fixed on that door. I didn't touch the lock. I didn't dare. Instead, I turned and climbed the stairs as fast as I could, my boots slipping on the dust. I didn't stop until I shoved the hatch open and dragged myself out. Gasping like I'd been drowning, the evidence room looked the same as always. Dead, empty, but I couldn't shake it. The cold, the carvings, the sound on the other side of that door, and the worst part? When I glanced down at my boots, the dust from the stairs was still clinging to them. Proof that I hadn't imagined it. Proof that something waited down there, something I wasn't supposed to find. I didn't sleep after finding that staircase. I tried. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that iron door again. The carvings! The dust disturbed by footprints that didn't return. And that scrape. That awful scrape on the other side. By morning, I convinced myself it was nothing. Just an old pipe or maybe rats. Anything but what my brain was trying to make it into. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake it. The basement had hooked into me. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It felt like it was pulling me back. So I went. The hatch opened easier the second time. My boots carried me down the steps before I had a chance to think it over. The carvings in the walls didn't look any softer in daylight. They looked worse. But I pushed past them, following the corridor again until I reached the iron door. I didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, I noticed something I'd missed before. To the right of the door, a narrow passage branched off, almost hidden in shadow. The walls pressed close and the air was even colder, but I felt drawn to it, like my feet were making the decision for me. The passage opened into a wide chamber, long and low. The beam of my flashlight swept across the walls, and my stomach twisted. Lockers. Row after row of rusting metal lockers lined the walls, stretching from one end of the room to the other. They looked like the kind you'd see in a school hallway or maybe an old gym. But here, underground, beneath a police station, they didn't make sense. I stepped closer, shining the light across their surfaces. Some were dented. Some hung open, their doors bent like someone had forced them. Others were shut tight, thick with rust, numbers stenciled in paint that had long since flaked away. I should have turned around. I should have left the room alone. But I didn't. I opened the first locker I came to. Inside was a single shoe, small, a child's sneaker. Its laces knotted, the fabric stiff with age, my chest tightened. I set it back and moved to the next. A jacket. Torn. Blood smeared across the sleeve in a way that hadn't faded even with time. I didn't want to touch it, but I couldn't stop myself. My hand brushed the fabric and I pulled back instantly. It was damp. I stood there for a long moment, breathing through my nose, trying to steady myself. The air smelled like rust, like wet stone, but beneath it was something else. Something sour, something that didn't belong. I went down the row, opening lockers one by one. A purse, still full, wallet inside, cards warped from damp. Keys on a ring, a stack of photographs curled at the edges. Faces of people I didn't know. Families, kids, couples, all smiling at a camera that no longer existed, a baseball cap. Torn jeans, a stuffed animal missing an eye. Every door I opened was worse than the last. These weren't random belongings. They weren't junk stored away. They were personal, pieces of lives. And I realized then what I was really looking at. Evidence. But not the kind tagged and bagged upstairs, filed away in the official record. No. These were things that had been hidden. Things no one was supposed to find. Things that belonged to the missing. I froze in the middle of the room, surrounded by all those rusting doors, and a terrible thought hit me. Someone had taken these. Someone had brought them down here, stuffed them into lockers, and walked away. But why? The silence pressed in so heavy that I could hear my own pulse. I turned slowly, my light sweeping over the endless rows. That's when I saw it. One locker at the far end stood wide open. The door bent outward, almost ripped from its hinges, and inside hung a uniform, a police uniform. Dark navy, patches still sewn onto the sleeves. Name tag crooked but readable. The name froze me. I had seen it before, carved into the wall upstairs. The officer, they said, died in the line of duty. I stepped closer. My throat dry, and I swear for a moment I heard it, the faint rustle of fabric, as if the jacket had just moved on its own. I reached out, fingertips brushing the collar, and a shiver shot through me, so violent I nearly dropped my flashlight. The air around the uniform was colder than anywhere else in the room, colder than the stairwell, colder than the iron door, and then something hit me, something that turned my stomach inside out. The shoes, the jacket, the purse, the photographs. None of them had tags. None of them were cataloged, but the uniform, it had a slip of paper pinned to it. a simple white tag, just like the ones in the official evidence room. The ink had bled with damp, but I could still make out the writing. Locker B12. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This wasn't just storage. This was a second evidence room, one that didn't exist on record. One buried underground behind hidden stairs and an iron door. But why? Why keep all of this down here? I backed away slowly, my flashlight trembling in my hand. My boot kicked something metal and I looked down. A locker key. It was old, the number scratched, nearly smooth, but I could still read it. B12. The same number on the tag. I didn't want it. I didn't even want to touch it, but somehow it was already in my hand, my fingers curling tight around it like it belonged there. The silence deepened. I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't just quiet, it was listening. The air in that room felt aware, like the second I moved. Everything inside those lockers would move with me. I couldn't stay. I shoved the key into my pocket and stumbled back through the passage, leaving the uniform swaying gently behind me. The carvings on the walls didn't look the same when I passed them again. They looked deeper, hungrier. When I finally climbed the stairs and shoved the hatch shut above me, I collapsed against the evidence room wall, gasping, my hands shaking so hard I dropped the flashlight. The building was silent again, but I couldn't stop thinking about those lockers, those belongings, that uniform with the tag pinned to it, and the key in my pocket, heavy and cold, like it had been waiting for me all along. I couldn't stop thinking about that key. All night it pressed against me from inside my pocket, heavy as stone. I should have thrown it into the river, buried it in the dirt, done anything except keep it. But when morning came, it was still there, waiting. And deep down, I knew why I hadn't let it go. Because whatever was down in that basement hadn't finished with me yet. I told myself I'd only go back once more, just once, and that would be it. I'd see what was behind that locked door, and then I'd walk away forever. But lies are easy to swallow when you want to believe them. So that evening I went back. The building greeted me the same way it always did, with silence. Dust hung in the light from the broken windows, and the air was thick with the smell of old stone and mildew. But the second I lifted the hatch and started down those hidden stairs, everything felt different, heavier, like the basement knew I was coming. The beam of my flashlight swept across the carvings again, but this time I lingered. I'd avoided them before, treated them like something I wasn't supposed to see. But now, my eyes couldn't stop tracing their lines. They weren't random scratches. They were words, names, dozens of them, carved into the concrete walls in jagged, desperate handwriting. Some overlapped, some faded into nothing, but others were fresh enough that I could still catch the shape of the letters. The same names that had been written in the logbook upstairs. My stomach turned. I pressed deeper into the passage, flashlight trembling in my hand. The corridor seemed to stretch further than before, walls pressing closer, the air sour with damp and rust. My boots echoed faintly, and I swear I heard another set of steps matching mine, just a second behind. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The narrow passage ended in another chamber, smaller than the locker room, but darker, more suffocating. My light caught on the walls, and I froze. They were covered. From floor to ceiling, the concrete was scarred with claw marks. Deep grooves, shallow scratches, endless lines cutting through the surface like an animal had been caged inside and clawed at the walls until its nails splintered. But these weren't animal marks. They were too deliberate. Some were tallies, straight lines scratched in groups of 5, running across the wall in endless rows. Hundreds of them, thousands, counting days maybe, or weeks, or years. I leaned closer, and my breath caught in my throat. Between the tallies were words, sentences scrawled in uneven letters, letters dug so deep into the concrete that flakes crumbled when I touched them. Still here. No light. They won't answer. He said my name. The last one sent a chill straight down my spine. I turned away, trying to steady myself, but it didn't help. Every wall was the same, covered with tallies and names. One corner of the room drew me in, even though I didn't want to go. The scratches there were darker, deeper, and when I held my light against them, I saw something that made me stumble back. A handprint, pressed into the wall, the fingers bent and warped like they'd clawed at the concrete so hard the shape had been burned in. The grooves were stained a darker color. I didn't want to believe it was blood, but the thought lodged in my head and wouldn't leave. I whispered out loud before I even realized I was speaking. "What happened down here?" The silence pressed back. My light flickered across more names, more marks. The desperation in them was unbearable. People had been trapped here. People had, scratched until their fingers bled, until the walls were full of their names. And then I saw it. At the far end of the chamber, etched deeper than any of the others, was a single word. My name. I froze where I stood, my body going cold all over. I stared at those letters dug into the concrete, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. It wasn't old. The edges of the scratches were clean, fresh. Someone had carved my name into that wall recently. My flashlight shook so badly that the beam danced across the floor. I staggered back, heart hammering, whispering to myself that it wasn't possible. It couldn't be. I hadn't been here before. No one else even knew I was coming. And yet, there it was. My name, carved into stone with the same desperation as all the others. I don't know how long I stood there, minutes maybe, just staring at it, waiting for the wall to move, for the letters to crumble away, for anything to prove I was imagining it. But it never did. The tallies around it seemed to blur together. A whole life counted in scratches, leading to nothing. My stomach turned as I realized some of the names I'd read upstairs were here too. Written again and again in different hands, as though the people before me had wanted to remind the world they existed. And now my name was among them. The air felt heavier. My ears filled with a low ringing sound like static, except I couldn't tell if it was real or inside my head. I stumbled back toward the passage, but before I left, something caught my eye. Near the floor, in the same jagged handwriting, were the words, "Still waiting." I don't know why, but reading those words made my chest seize up. I felt like whoever wrote them wasn't talking about themselves. They were talking about me. I shoved myself out of the chamber, nearly tripping in the corridor, my flashlight beam swinging wildly. The carvings on the walls seemed to close in on me. Every name, every tally, every mark felt alive, like they were moving just out of sight. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, slammed the hatch shut, and leaned against it, shaking so hard my teeth clattered. I wanted to tell myself it was just old graffiti, just vandalism left behind. But the truth wouldn't let me go. Those names weren't random. Those tallies weren't random, and my name wasn't supposed to be there, but it was. And whoever carved it hadn't left. They were still waiting. When I left the basement that night, I told myself I wasn't going back. I told myself I'd seen enough. The claw marks, the tallies, my name carved into the concrete like a curse. That should have been the end. But the truth is, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those walls again, scratched raw by hands that never made it out. I'd hear the sound of nails dragging down stone, steady and hopeless. And every time, my gaze would fall back to that single word carved fresher than the rest. My name. I couldn't escape it. So when I found the journal, part of me knew I'd been waiting for it. It wasn't like I stumbled on it by accident. No. It felt almost placed, sitting there in the corner office, the one room upstairs that I hadn't searched as carefully. The drawer of a broken desk had been jammed shut. When I yanked it free, dust and splinters flew up, and inside was a thin, leather-bound book. The cover was cracked, but the pages were intact. A guard's journal. At least that's what it looked like. I sat down right there, at the desk with the broken leg, and opened it. The first entries were boring enough. Rotations, names, schedules. The kind of things you'd expect a low-level security guard to jot down when he was trying to keep track of his shifts. But the further I went, the more the tone changed. The writing grew messier, the sentences shorter, the words heavier. The first thing that made my skin crawl was a line scrawled across the top of a page in thick, uneven letters. Not supposed to write this down. From there, the entries stopped sounding like a record of a job and more like a confession. The guard, though he never signed his name, started talking about prisoners. Not the ones who appeared in official logs, but others. People who were brought in after hours. People who weren't supposed to exist. He called them unofficial. I remember staring at that word for a long time. My hands were sweating, and the page crinkled under my thumb. Unofficial. The guard said these prisoners were never logged, never given files. They were just taken downstairs, to the holding rooms beneath the facility. I think my hands were shaking when I read that, because I knew exactly which rooms he meant. The tallies, the names, the scratches. The journal went on to describe what he called special orders. Sometimes the prisoners would be left alone in the dark for days, even weeks. Other times, they were questioned. The guard never explained what that meant, not directly. But the way his handwriting pressed harder into the page, letters cutting deep into the paper, it was enough to tell me it wasn't something I wanted to picture. Then there were the voices. The guard mentioned them almost casually at first, like something he didn't believe. He wrote that during his night shifts, when he sat at the end of the hall, he'd sometimes hear whispers coming from behind the locked doors. Not voices begging or crying, but something else. Something speaking through the prisoners. He said, the words didn't make sense at first, just low murmurs. But the longer he listened, the clearer they became. He started writing them down. And that's when the entries turned strange. Whole pages of the journal were filled with broken sentences, fragments of things that looked less like language and more like warnings. Not alone. He's counting with me. They scratch, but the walls never open. Still waiting. I felt the breath catch in my throat when I saw that one. Still waiting. The same words I'd seen carved into the wall. I closed the journal for a moment, pressing my hand against the leather, like that could stop the unease crawling through me. But I couldn't stop. I needed to know what else he'd written. The entries grew frantic toward the end. The guard said he stopped reporting to his superiors. He stopped sleeping. He couldn't eat. He described feeling watched even when the holding rooms were empty. He wrote that sometimes, when he walked the hall, he'd find new tallies scratched into the walls overnight, even when no one had been placed inside. The worst entry was the last one. It wasn't dated. It wasn't even finished. The words just trailed off mid-sentence like the guard had been forced to stop writing. It read, "They called my name last night. Not the prisoners. The walls. The walls knew me. I don't think they'll let me leave. I think they already..." And then nothing. Just a dark smear across the page, like the pen had been dragged away. I closed the journal and sat there in silence, staring at the desk. The walls knew me. The words rang in my head like an echo I couldn't silence, because that's what I felt too down there. When I saw my name carved into the concrete, fresh and waiting, the walls knew me. I didn't take the journal with me. I couldn't. Touching it felt like touching something alive, something that didn't want to be moved. But I couldn't unknow what I'd read. The unofficial prisoners, the scratches, the whispers, the guard's descent into madness, or maybe something worse. And if the journal was real, if any of it was true, then that meant the names carved into the basement walls weren't just the past. They were still here, still waiting. That night, when I tried to sleep, I kept hearing a sound in the quiet of my apartment. Faint, almost nothing. Like fingernails dragging slowly across concrete. I don't know why I went back down there. It was late, later than I should have been at the station. Everyone else had gone home, the streets outside were quiet, and the building sat heavy in silence. That's when it always called to me the loudest. The basement. The stairs. The scratches and names carved into the walls. I told myself it was just to check once more, to prove to myself there was nothing left to find. But the truth was simpler. I couldn't stay away. Something about it kept pulling at me like a thread wrapped around my chest. The hidden staircase creaked under my weight as I went down. Dust fell in little clouds, catching in the glow of my flashlight. My heart was already pounding before I reached the bottom. The air was colder down there, always colder. Like the walls were pulling the heat out of me, I turned the light toward the hallway. The concrete walls stretched into the dark, lined with those rusting lockers, those scarred etchings of names and claw marks. I told myself I'd just look, just walk through once and then leave. But then I heard it. Breathing. It was faint, but sharp enough to freeze me where I stood. Not my breathing. Not an echo. Something else. Coming from deeper in the hall. I held the flashlight tighter, feeling sweat rise across my palms. My first thought was that it had to be an animal. A rat, maybe. Something small caught inside the lockers or in the old vents. But it didn't sound like that. It sounded human. Slow, steady breaths. Inhale, exhale. I forced myself to walk forward. My boots scuffed against the dust and grit on the floor, every step too loud, giving me away. I passed the lockers, past the scratched walls where I'd traced my fingers over names that weren't supposed to exist. And then I reached the holding cells. The bars were rusted. Some bent, but they were empty. I knew they were empty. I had checked them before, one by one. Nothing had been down here for years. But the sound came from inside one of them, the third cell on the left. I stopped in front of it. My flashlight beam shook against the bars, bouncing off the concrete inside. Empty. The room was empty. I could see the corners, the floor, the wall with its rows of tallies carved by hands that had once counted every day of their captivity. But still, I heard it. Breathing. I leaned closer. My own breaths were shallow, ragged, and I tried to hold them back so I could hear clearly. And yes, it was there, inhale, exhale, slow, patient. Like whoever or whatever was inside had been waiting a long, long time. I whispered out, though I don't even know why. Hello? The sound didn't stop. No movement. No voice. Just the rhythm of air pulling in and out. I lifted the flashlight higher, shining it across every inch of the cell. My heart hammered against my ribs. The place was bare. Nothing but cold walls and iron bars. Still, the sound filled the air. I stumbled back a step, the beam shaking. I can hear you, I whispered. The breathing slowed. Drawn out? Deeper now, not frightened, not startled. Calm, almost mocking, and that was when I felt it. The same pressure I had felt before in this place. The sense that the walls were alive. That they knew me. That they were waiting. But this time, it wasn't the walls, it was the cell. The air felt heavier, pressing in on me. My skin prickled. Every instinct told me to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I stood there, trapped by the sound, by the weight of it. And then, just for a second, I swore I saw it. Not a person. Not exactly, more like the outline of something shifting against the wall. A darker shadow within the dark, hunched low, pressed close. I blinked, and it was gone. But the breathing never stopped. I forced myself to speak again, though my throat was dry and my voice cracked. Who are you? No answer. Just air. Steady. Endless. It felt like the cell itself was alive, exhaling in rhythm with me. I backed away, step by step, until the cell was only half lit in my flashlight beam. The sound seemed to follow me, stretching into the hall. By the time I reached the staircase, I was shaking so badly I could barely hold the light. I turned it off and climbed fast, the darkness pressing against my back like it was chasing me. When I reached the top, I slammed the hidden door shut and stood there with my forehead against the wood, trying to catch my breath. But I couldn't. Because I realized something. That breathing I had heard, it wasn't random. It had matched mine. Every inhale, every exhale. Perfectly in sync, like it was waiting for me, like it knew me. And as I stood there in the quiet, I swear I could still hear it. Faint, muffled, seeping up through the floorboards, breathing with me, breathing for me. And I knew then. The cell wasn't empty. It never had been. I always thought I had seen the entire station. Every hallway, every office, even the places that weren't on the official maps. But one night, while tracing the basement stairs back up, I noticed a door I hadn't before. It was set low into the wall, half hidden behind filing cabinets that had long since rusted into place. The handle gave after a hard tug, and the smell that poured out was different. Not the usual dust and mold of the rest of the building. This was older, heavier, like stale paper, sweat, and something bitter, like old smoke ground into wood. The room on the other side was small. An annex of sorts, 4 walls, high ceiling, a row of benches arranged in 2 neat lines. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. A courtroom, not a proper one. Not the kind you'd find in a real courthouse. This was smaller, stripped down, built only for necessity. An annex courtroom, tucked away inside the station itself. And it looked staged. The benches were lined with dust but arranged perfectly, none of them overturned like in the rest of the station. At the far end was the judge's chair, raised slightly on a platform, looming over the room. The witness stand, the prosecutor's table, even a single chair for the accused. It was all there, but there were no papers. No records, no trace of an actual trial. Just the furniture, positioned as if everyone had simply stepped out for a break, never to return. I don't know why, but the sight of it unsettled me more than the cells, more than the lockers or scratched walls. Something about it felt wrong in a different way. Courtrooms are supposed to be places of order, places where truth is weighed, where rules matter, but this didn't feel like that. This felt like theater. I stepped closer. The wooden floor groaned under my boots, and the sound echoed back too sharp for such a small room. My light passed over the benches, the empty chair where the accused would sit, the silent stand where witnesses would have sworn their honesty, all untouched, all waiting. My eyes kept going back to the judge's chair. It was tall, carved in dark wood, the kind that didn't rot easily. Heavy, oppressive. My father used to take me to court when I was young, when he didn't have anyone to watch me. I remember how even in those real rooms, the judge's seat always felt larger than life, like it wasn't meant for a person, but for something bigger. This chair felt like that. But worse, I walked up the aisle slowly, like I was afraid to disturb the silence. My hands itched with the urge to touch the chair to see if it was real, but something inside me resisted. Instead, I stopped in front of it. The platform was just high enough that I had to tilt my head back to look at it fully. The seat was wide, too wide. The arms stretched out, thick and polished, as though whoever sat there needed more room than most, and the cushion, if you could call it that, was stained. Dark patches spread across the fabric, some round, some smeared. At first, I told myself it was water or mold. But deep down, I knew better. It looked like blood, old, blackened, soaked deep into the fabric. My stomach tightened, and I forced myself to look away. I focused instead on the rest of the room, desperate to break the pull of that chair. That's when I noticed the jury box. It was smaller than any real courtroom's jury box. But it was there, 10 chairs arranged in a row, not 12. All of them pointed toward the center, toward the accused, and on the desk in front of them, scratched deep into the wood, were words. Guilty. Repeated over and over. Some carved clean, others jagged, like done in haste or fury. The word filled the surface, written in layers, one on top of the other. I stepped closer, running my fingers across the grooves. The scratches felt fresh in places, sharp enough to cut. I whispered the word without meaning to. Guilty. The sound hung in the air, heavier than it should have been. I turned back to the chair. For a moment, I swore I saw something there. Not a person, not fully. Just the outline of weight, the slight dip in the cushion, the impression of something sitting, watching. My light trembled in my hand. The thought came fast and uninvited. What if this trial never ended? What if it wasn't meant to? What if the chair was still occupied? I forced myself back. One step, then another. My boots scuffed the floor loud enough to echo off the walls. Too loud, breaking the silence in ways I didn't want to. And as I backed toward the door, I noticed something else. The chair for the accused. It wasn't empty. On the seat, covered in dust, was a length of frayed rope, not tied, not coiled neatly, just sitting there, waiting. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. I left the room fast, pulling the door shut behind me, the air in my lungs burning. But even as I stood back in the hall, trying to convince myself it was only furniture, only a forgotten annex, I couldn't shake the feeling that the room wasn't really abandoned. The judge's chair was still there, still waiting, and I had been the only one to stand before it in years, the only one it had seen, and maybe the only one it had judged. I didn't go back to the annex right away. I told myself I'd leave it alone, that I'd seen enough. But the truth is, once you open a door like that, it doesn't close. Not really. The image of that judge's chair followed me around, a shadow in the back of my mind. And then I found the papers. They weren't in a cabinet or a drawer. Not where you'd expect. They were in a cardboard box shoved under one of the desks upstairs. Most of it was junk. Forms with water stains, receipts, memos so faded the ink had bled to nothing. But near the bottom, wrapped in a yellowed sheet of butcher paper, were documents that didn't belong anywhere else in the station. Trial records. Except, not real ones. The headers were wrong. No court names, no official seals. Just dates, names, and the same repeating title, sentencing. No opening arguments. No evidence lists. No testimonies. Just verdicts. I flipped through them one after another. The dates caught me first. All of them were stamped after the station was supposedly closed. Years after. Each paper was written in the same clipped style, like a transcript stripped of everything but its bones. Accused, unnamed. Charge, unspecified. Verdict, guilty. Sentence, carried out immediately. That phrase appeared again and again, carried out immediately, but there were no signatures. No judges' names, no jurors. Just the initials JC scrawled at the bottom of every page. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the papers had been staged, some weird training exercise. But the deeper I read, the less that made sense. Because there were details, descriptions that slipped through, like the writer couldn't help but add them. Subject was uncooperative. Rope required. Subject continued to deny charges. Gag applied. Subject screamed for mother until final moment. I remember sitting there with my hand frozen on the page, staring at those words until the room seemed to tilt. These weren't exercises. They weren't staged. These were accounts, and the sentencing. It hadn't been symbolic. The more I read, the worse it got. Names began to appear, scribbled, inconsistent, but familiar. I recognized one from the missing persons reports I'd found earlier in the evidence room. Another from a clipping in the old newspaper archives. People who had vanished without explanation, without closure. And here they were, reduced to lines on paper. Guilty, sentenced, carried out immediately. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but it was hard. My hands kept shaking. I don't know why I kept going. Maybe I thought I'd find a page that would explain it, something that would prove it was fake. But every new sheet only dragged me deeper. Somewhere near the bottom of the stack, I found one that froze me completely. Accused, Officer M. Verdict, guilty. Sentence carried out immediately. That was it. No elaboration. Just those words. And scrawled in the margin, darker and shakier than the rest, was something different. He deserved it. I dropped the papers. They spilled across the desk, fluttering to the floor like broken wings. The silence in the room thickened, pressing down on me until I could barely move. I wanted to walk away, to leave the papers where they fell, but my eyes kept dragging back to them. The sentences were always the same. No jury, no appeal. No escape. The accused had never stood a chance. The next time I found myself back in the annex, I wasn't surprised. Maybe I had always known I would return. The room looked the same. Dust frozen in the air, benches aligned, the chair looming. But now, with the papers in my mind, it didn't feel staged anymore. It felt lived in. The judge's chair seemed heavier, almost sagging under its own weight. The jury box wasn't just furniture. It was a place where that word had been carved again and again. Guilty. And the accused's chair, with that rope. I couldn't stop thinking of the lines in the papers. Rope required. Gag applied. This was where it had happened. Not just one sentencing, dozens, maybe more, all carried out here in secret, beneath the surface of an already rotting station. I stood there too long. My light flickered across the room, catching shadows that seemed too thick to belong to me. The air was colder than before. I thought about leaving, but my eyes fell back on the judge's chair. For a moment, I thought I saw something resting on its arm, a hand, pale, long-fingered, curled against the wood. I blinked, and it was gone. But the paper's words echoed in my head. Loud and sharp as a gavel, sentence carried out immediately, and I knew, with a certainty that made my skin crawl, that this courtroom hadn't been abandoned. Not really. The trials had just gone deeper. Maybe they never stopped. Maybe they were still happening. And maybe I was already in the middle of one. I told myself I wouldn't go back. After what I'd read, after what I'd seen, only an idiot would keep stepping into that annex courtroom. But fear has a strange pull. The things you don't understand. They gnaw at you until you give in. So I went back. Not once. Not twice. I kept returning like something was pulling me by the ribs. Each time I swore it would be the last. Each time I found myself standing under that buzzing light, staring at the judge's chair. It didn't feel like a chair anymore. It felt like a throne, a place of power, of control. And I knew that whoever sat in it had decided the fate of every single person whose name was scratched onto those papers. But I still hadn't found the last piece. The book. It was late when I finally did. I'd been digging through the evidence lockers again, my flashlight beam jittering over rusted hinges and broken latches. Most of the lockers were empty, but behind one of the warped metal doors, shoved between moldy files, was something heavy and bound in cracked leather. The cover had no title. Just a surface worn smooth, edges frayed, smelling of mildew and iron. When I opened it, my stomach tightened. It wasn't loose pages like before. This was the original ledger, every sentencing, every verdict, written in the same sharp handwriting as if carved into the paper instead of inked. The dates stretched back decades, further than they should have, before the annex was even built, if the station's records were to be believed. But the names, God, the names, I recognized some. Missing people, drifters, a woman from a clipping I'd read who had vanished walking home one night. A teenager last seen near the bus depot. Each one marked with a single word in jagged letters. Guilty. There were no charges. No defenses. Just names and guilt. The ledger grew darker the further I turned. Some pages were smeared with stains I didn't want to think about. Others had indentations, like they'd been pressed on by something heavy. Something that made the paper buckle. Then I saw it. My hand froze. The beam of my flashlight shaking as it landed on the bottom of one page. My own name, spelled perfectly. Beneath it, in the same hand as all the others, guilty, no hesitation. No explanation, just that one word. I stared at it for what felt like forever. At first I thought it had to be a trick. Someone else with the same name, some coincidence. But the more I looked, the more I knew it wasn't. It was me. I felt my throat close up, the air thinning around me. My pulse hammered so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. I flipped back through the pages, searching desperately, hoping I'd find duplicates, hoping I'd see that name again, attached to someone else. But no, just once, just mine. And it wasn't near the beginning, or buried deep in the past. It was recent, too recent. My flashlight dimmed as if the battery was choking. I didn't want to look at the judge's chair, but I couldn't help myself. It sat there in the corner of my vision, taller now, like it had stretched. Waiting. The jury box loomed beside it, rows of empty seats. I'd never noticed how clean they were. No dust on the benches, no cobwebs clinging to the corners. As if someone or something still sat there, watching, judging. The silence in that room was suffocating. Not empty silence, expectant silence. The kind you hear right before a verdict is read aloud. And I realized something that chilled me deeper than anything else. I had never heard the words spoken in this place. Never read them aloud myself, but I could feel them building. The sentence, carried out immediately. I dropped the book. It hit the floor with a crack that echoed far too loudly, like a gavel slamming down. My ears rang. My body froze, and then, very softly, from somewhere behind me, I thought I heard the scrape of a bench shifting. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Instead, I picked up the ledger, clutching it against my chest, and staggered out of the annex, my flashlight beam wild on the walls. I should have left it there. I should have sealed the door and never gone back. But I didn't. I brought it with me. Even now it sits beside me, heavy and silent, the cracked leather dark in the corner of my vision. I've tried to burn it. The pages don't catch. I've tried to rip it apart. The paper won't tear, and every night, I swear the book moves closer to me. I'll set it on the desk. And when I wake, it's on the floor by my bed. I'll leave it in the closet. And later, I'll find it resting on the kitchen table, open to the page with my name, guilty. That word is always waiting for me. I don't know who decided it. I don't know what crime I've supposedly committed, but I know this. Verdicts in that place are final. No jury. No appeal. Sentence carried out immediately. And I think maybe it's already happening. The shadows in my apartment don't feel like they belong to me anymore. I hear the shuffle of benches at night. The creak of the judge's chair settling under invisible weight. Sometimes, I wake up with rope burn marks around my wrists. Sometimes, I dream of standing in that annex courtroom, staring at the judge's chair, unable to move, unable to speak, while a dozen unseen eyes bore into me from the empty jury box. And always the sound comes. A gavel, slamming down. Final absolute. I don't know how much longer I have, but I know one thing. The verdict has already been read, and it was mine. Guilty.